important dates in Kosovo history. How do you look back at it now, having in mind especially the current situation?
Well, I still look back on it with a certain degree of pride because I felt that compared with Bosnia, where NATO hesitated before intervening, set many red lines that it didn't really keep, and we had, as you know, 100,000 people killed and 2.5 million refugees and displaced people before finally NATO intervened in 1995. When it came to Kosovo, I really felt that NATO handled it a lot better. There was an attempt to negotiate at Ramnuje, but NATO made it clear that if the Serbs backed away from that agreement, which you remember that the Kosovo Albanians accepted, and if they went back, the Serbs went back to a campaign of repression, NATO would act. And on March the 24th, the Allies agreed to do so. Sometimes action is necessary. You have to be prepared to act. And so I felt that this time round we had a much better chance of intervening preventively and stopping massive violence in Kosovo, even if it was impossible to save the lives of everybody, of course.
And having in mind a recent sad event, I'd say the passing of Madeleine Albrightit, I would like you to maybe just give us an idea as to what her particular role was during this whole time in Ramnuje especially, and then as Secretary of State of US during the, let's say, negotiations and then the campaign itself.
Yes, well, like you, I was deeply affected yesterday by the news of Madeleine Albright's death. I knew her very well personally. She was a great inspiration for me, and I worked with her back in 2010 when she was the chairperson of a group of experts. I was also part of that group that prepared NATO's new strategic concept, which is still NATO's mission statement today. But of course, in the Kosovo years, she was a passionate believer in humanitarian intervention. She believed that NATO should not simply stay inside its borders after the end of the Cold War and wait to be attacked, but that NATO should use its military and political assets actively to stop genocide, to stop massive crimes against humanity, human rights violations in Europe. She believed in being very firm with dictators, whether they're called Putin, Milosevic, and she was the Pentagon, which sometimes was for what they thought were little wars, that the Pentagon and NATO more generally should be prepared to use force if necessary. And so she came, as you know, from Czechoslovakia.
Yes.
She was forced to flee to the United States because of the repression of the Nazis. She was deeply scarred by that experience, the experience of appeasement, of not standing up to dictators in the 1930s, which had produced the Second World War. And so I think her childhood really shaped her vision of life. But she was a great believer in liberal democracy, and may her soul rest in peace.
And you mentioned the new NATO mission statement, but let's get back to 1999. Would you say that it actually formed the intervention in Yugoslavia, it shaped and it proved to the world what NATO is essentially there for?
Well, yes, certainly. It said that, you know, NATO is not only interested in its own security, it's interested in the security of its neighbours as well, even if they are not members of the alliance. And I think if you look at Ukraine today, yes, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but is NATO turning its back on Ukraine and leaving it defenceless in the face of Putin? Of course not. You see that there's a summit today in Brussels. President Biden is in Europe for that. You see that NATO member states are giving lots of weapons to Ukraine, which are really helping the Ukrainians to fight back and defend themselves. You see that NATO members have imposed big sanctions on Putin and doing many things to keep Ukraine as a free and democratic state. So I think the Kosovo experience in '99, which is defending people who want to be European, who want to be free, and stopping repression, that I think also shaped the way in which NATO afterwards went to Afghanistan and tried to improve the life of the Afghans. not always with the greatest results, it has to be admitted, but at least the effort was made, and the way in which NATO is standing up, as I said, in Ukraine today.
And on the other hand, having in mind exactly the situation in